So like it or not, I guess Brexit has had an impact on Europe's financial markets. And I guess one of the notable things is two of Europe's largest exchange infrastructures have, I think they've transitioned, however you want to call it, one to Bergamo and the other, I think, from one side of London to the other, if that's right. So first up, I guess, what's the thinking behind those moves?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's certainly shaken up the status quo, to kind of coin a good phrase, I guess. So the first big move we've seen is that Euronext, who are currently have their main data center in Basildon, just outside of London, have decided to move their main one to Bergamo in northern Italy. And the reason they've done this was off the back of their acquisition of Borsa Italiana off the London Stock Exchange Group. So as part of that acquisition, I think there was some discussion about moving some of their infrastructure within the EU 27. So that was part of it. Obviously, you know, I think in the kind of higher echelons of the decision makers, there was some nervousness about leaving their critical infrastructure outside of Europe after Brexit, although the regulations that were put in after Brexit do allow for these exchange critical infrastructures to sit outside of the Eurozone. That may not stay into the future. So I think there was some future planning going on there. We've also seen Euronext have kind of been on a reasonably aggressive expansion over the last 5 years in terms of their acquisition pipeline. So they've previously bought the Dublin Exchange, then the Oslo Exchange a couple of years ago, and like I said, Milan, Borsa Italiana recently. So I think, you know, the Basildon data center that they were previously in was a bit of a legacy data center. It was left over from when they were previously owned by NYSE and ICE, who are the New York Stock Exchange and ICE Intercontinental Exchange. And I think there was some desire to kind of take that control back into their own hands. So that kind of covers Euronext. And then in the background as well, whilst this has been going on, we've also had another major data center move from a different exchange, the London Stock Exchange Group. They're moving their main data center from Earl Street in kind of in the city to the Docklands campus to Telehouse North. And I think the main thinking there was, first of all, to kind of give their main center a complete upgrade. And also the Docklands campus is Europe's most densely populated data center footprint in terms of interconnectivities. It's completely cloud enabled. And also, if you think of it kind of geographically, it's positioned in that kind of bottom southeastern corner of London. So it's right in the right area. A lot of the interconnects that are coming in from Europe land in that area. So you're reducing latency into the continent, which, as we've seen, is now more important than ever, given that some of the one of the other big exchanges has also moved to Europe. So yeah, that's been the main reasons we've seen for those moves.
Okay, and in terms of the of those moves, saying it sounds very simple, but the actual sort of doing is different. So connectivity and network challenges. I mean, you know, I know migrating just one application from A to B can be fraught with stress, but migrating whole data center infrastructures, etc. I'm presuming there's a lot of, say, connectivity and network challenges around that.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's been, to say the least, one of the main things we've been focusing on over the last 12 months or so, and that's kind of coming to a bit of a crescendo now. The go live date for Euronext is the 6th of June, and that's a hard cutover, so there'll be no parallel run with their existing data center. So, you know, there's obviously quite a lot of pressure on that date. To go to your question, yes, there's been huge implications. I think probably the main one is that the ecosystem of clients that sit within these data center environments have had to make some kind of really big decisions on what their strategy is moving forwards, and that's involved, and by that I mean that's involved kind of doing a thorough undertaking of their trading activities. So how important are certain markets? Because what we've seen is, although Euronext have decided to move to the continent, there are still the vast majority of other exchanges and MTFs, multilateral trading facilities, which kind of sit in between exchanges and brokers. They're keeping their infrastructure in London. So it's not been quite as simple as let's just move everything over to Italy. They have to, there's been a lot of kind of decision making around how much of my trading activity is staying in London, how much of it is going to be continuing on Euronext, and then making a decision about where they want to base. Do they keep their infrastructure in London and focus on low latency connectivity to Europe, or do they move some of their infrastructure to Europe, or do they move their entire infrastructure to Europe? And what we've been doing at Colt is really kind of helping clients through that process and consulting on some of those decision making, and I think clearly some clients are having to go into the co-location site in Bergamo because Euronext is their most important market, and there's just a no-brainer, so to speak. But we have had quite a lot of clients that are looking for kind of different solutions, I guess. So that might be, as I just mentioned, low latency connectivity from London, or looking for proximity sites that are quite close to Bergamo. So we've seen increased interest in Milan, for instance, the Milan metro area. So there's been some new Equinix have a new data center there, ML5, which has been quite popular, which maybe we can touch on in a bit. So those are kind of the main challenges we've seen. And then also, as a bit of a side note, there's what I would probably describe as ancillary services. So what you find is in a location like Basildon, where we have this, not just Euronext, but also ICE's matching engines. You find that a lot of brokers and kind of smaller MTFs have also based their infrastructure in the same data center, because it's, for kind of economies of scale around the ecosystem, and it's close to the Euronext, infrastructure as well. So they've had to make decisions on what they want to do. Do they stay in Basildon, or do they follow Euronext to Italy? Or what we've seen with a lot of them is they've decided to move across London to LD4, which is another key location where MTFs are currently located. So that's been another one. And and just finally, the Borsa Italiana acquisition that I mentioned at the beginning from Euronext. There's also been the transition of that market from the LSE platform to Euronext, which has been going on top of all these major data center moves, and that's had its own intricacies as well that we've had to kind of deal with. So I think the main thing really is we've been trying to sit down with clients and guide them through the process as smoothly as possible, and really understand their business, which has been able to help us, advise as best we can.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think just to add to what Mike's saying, the operational risk is obviously massive, because this is people's primary trading infrastructure. This has come after the pandemic. So what we've tried to do is also work with key partners. So the likes of the cloud service providers, and I think Mike mentioned Equinix, as well as Telehouse, the data center providers, to make sure that it's a smooth transition for the customers. So the customers and our partners understand that Colt is one of the few telcos that have a capital markets vertical. So we understand the challenges of our clients, and we also own the physical metro fiber as well. So the Aruba data center in Bergamo was already on net. We were one of two international carriers that were connected to that data center, so we already had a presence. We have a lot of connectivity. I think we have one of the most cross connects within the Telehouse data center. So Colt connect to 900 data centers globally, and a lot of those are key financial hubs. So the service providers, the cloud service providers, the data center providers, the clients, we've all been working with them over the last 18 months to make sure we can have a smooth transition, but also post COVID, people are really looking at the way that they utilize their infrastructure. So a lot of people are going to leverage cloud more. They're looking at new technologies, and we've been using it as an opportunity to upgrade our infrastructure and also help customers go through this this sort of turbulent time and make sure the impact is minimal and there's reduced risk to their strategies.
Okay, so I mean, it sounds like clearly the trading's secure, and continuity of trading is security of it is crucial. Latency you mentioned, I know historically that milliseconds or whatever it is matter in these things. So that's and you mentioned cloud there. I'm just interested, maybe follow that up a bit more. What's going on with the cloud world? Because I tend to assume that financial houses tend to do much of it themselves because they're reluctant to trust it, but cloud services are becoming more important to them.
Yeah, so if we just take the latency point first, absolutely, that is, as I'm sure you're aware, one of the if not the main deciding factor for a lot of our clients. So as soon as the announcement was made by Euronext and LSE, we were straight off the mark in terms of upgrading our infrastructure between Bergamo and the other key centres in Europe, so the likes of Zurich, Frankfurt, and London. So we've actually put in the lowest latency links between those 4 locations to enable our clients to take advantage of the best routes that are on the market. So that's one point. We also have a product called the market monitoring tool, which we're currently developing. So this is a product we've had in-house for a number of years, and we're trying to productize it for our clients, and that enables us to monitor the feeds that we're moving around these different locations. So monitor stuff like the latency, the jitter, potential packet loss. And we're finding that clients are increasingly wanting these kind of products to help them understand their own data flows around key locations. So that's been something that's been kind of built into the strategy that we put together when we've been redesigning our network in Europe. And just to touch on the second point you mentioned about cloud. So yes, I think the thing with clouds is that I think specifically capital markets firms and trading firms have probably lagged a little bit behind the broader enterprise market on cloud adoption, purely because of the reasons you just mentioned. There's a big emphasis on latency and secure trading, and certainly when you introduce the clouds, there are latency implications, and there is a kind of preconceived conception around security as well with the clouds, and maybe not security, but specifically having control of certain data flows in-house is very important. And I think Terence mentioned, if you take a major kind of multinational bank, they have certain obligations around their trading infrastructure, and it's vitally important for them to keep that in-house and keep control of that in-house. However, post-pandemic, and particularly in the second half of last year, we have kind of seen capital markets finally wake up to the potential of cloud, and you saw that last year, most notably with the announcement between the CME, with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, which is the largest futures and commodities exchange in the world, and their announcement with Google. So they announced a 10-year, $1 billion partnership to start to move some of their trading critical infrastructure into the cloud. So this really kind of sets a new course, I guess, for cloud adoption in the industry. Previously, we'd seen back office and kind of non-trading critical infrastructure had moved as aligned with the rest of enterprise. But this announcement really kind of changed the goalposts and was a big statement, I guess, for the industry that we're going to start moving some of our trading critical infrastructure into the cloud. So as soon as that came out, we've been from a Colt perspective, we've been having these conversations with our clients for a number of years, and also our partnerships with financial exchanges as well, who wanted to kind of develop their own cloud strategies. But it really was kind of, it's a little bit chicken and egg. It's, people were often waiting for the first person to make the move. So this was kind of a big thing in our industry to help move that conversation along, and we've started to discuss, particularly with the secondary and tertiary exchanges, their cloud strategy off the back of this announcement, and how they intend to run stuff like their market data products through the cloud environments. So we're currently working with a number of the big cloud providers on proof of concepts for how this would work. And the other big thing just to mention about cloud, which is increasingly important for financial services, is the potential for flexible contracts and the turning up and turning down benefits that you have with cloud. And I think, if you look at financial markets historically, trading firms kind of rigidly stuck to markets they knew. They'd have strategies, whether that was equities or a specific commodity. They had a strategy around that, trading that commodity. Take gold, for example, that they would employ. But certainly in the last 10 years and since the pandemic, and as we've seen volatility increase in the markets, a lot of firms are using strategies that they've used profitably on other markets into new areas. And I think, you only have to take examples like the oil market a couple of years ago when the price went negative, the gas market recently that's been particularly volatile, nickel in the last month or so, which has also been volatile. These are creating opportunities for trading firms, and people are increasingly want to use the strategies that they're using in different markets on these new markets, but maybe they only want to do it for a couple of months. So this is where the cloud really holds benefits. Can we offer a product where you can almost connect to financial markets on demand, turning up and turning down bandwidth as volatility increases? So these are all the kind of discussions that we're having at the moment with exchanges, with our trading clients, and also with the cloud providers.
Okay, and I'm guessing another attraction of cloud is potentially the cost angle, but I'm just sort of more generally, when people are looking at making a data center move, I guess cost is one of the critical factors. With the ones you've been sort of referencing, politics and geography maybe come in. And then I'm thinking technology solutions. We've got things like software-defined networking, and everyone's talking about the edge at the moment. So if it's not too difficult, can you sort of unpick that sort of selection as to what matters to who, or is it very much a case-by-case basis, or just what you're seeing in the market would be good?
Yeah, I think I can take this one, Mike. So yeah, I mean, obviously, as we've mentioned, they've actually been proactively coming to us, because without the network, without the connectivity, the cloud doesn't function. You still, and also without the data centers, there's no connectivity. So our partnership with the likes of Equinix, or with the likes of AWS or Google or Microsoft, is really around the whole ecosystem. So one of the things that people like about the cloud is the speed in which technology is evolving. You're kind of outsourcing that. Cloud is still a data center somewhere. It's just that you're using virtual machines. So you're kind of outsourcing that to the cloud service providers to maintain the infrastructure. But to Mike's point, firms need to be agile. People have had to accept, Colt's voice business, for example, went through the roof during the pandemic because more people were working from home. So there was more requirement for the likes of Microsoft Teams, Zoom, all that needs connectivity, which is underpinned by Colt. So those are some of our biggest enterprise clients. But within capital markets, they want the same kind of flexibility. So to Mike's point, somebody could be in London, but there could be an opportunity to trade the Chinese markets. They don't want to be waiting, 3 months for telecoms to be delivered and all the licensing. what we've tried to do is create almost a Netflix of capital markets, where as long as you have agreement with the exchange, you know, we've got the software-defined networking where we can provide on-demand access to any of those data center locations or any of those exchanges. We can flex that that bandwidth based on the activity that's happening in the market. And as Mike mentioned, the market data monitoring is a key aspect of that. You know, people want to know that if they're connecting to a particular market, that they're getting all the data and it's all in sequence, that if there is a problem, how to resolve that problem quickly. Is there an issue at the exchange, at the edge? Is there an issue with the customer application? Is there an issue within the cloud environment? So we're working on solutions where you can monitor it end to end, all the way from the exchange up to the customer application. So technology, it's kind of enhanced the speed of the evolution of capital markets. Maybe, you know, 2 years of evolution has happened in the last 6 months, just due to the fact that the pandemic's happening and all these data center moves have allowed people to upgrade their infrastructure. So we're working with a lot of the independent service providers as well that provide solutions to the capital markets. So to Mike's point, a lot of the ancillary services which sit around the exchanges. So the people that provide all the management systems, the people that provide trading platforms, you know, they're looking at their data center strategies and leveraging the cloud for that flexibility. So it's almost like a perfect storm, and we kind of sit in the middle because we are the plumbing that underpins everything. And we're also making, you know, on demand and challenging the exchanges around flexible contracts. To Mike's point, if somebody wants to trade the Singapore market, for example, for 3 months, they don't want a 12-month obligation. So we all have to work together as a community to be able to provide that flexibility for customers, so they can be agile enough to take advantage of that opportunity on instantaneously, and those contractual or technical barriers can be removed.
Okay, and this one may be a sort of non-starter, but I know, well, we all know the issues at the moment with you know, cost of fossil fuels, energy, power. And I know the data centers buy, you know, they're clever, they buy power, you know, months, years in advance. So maybe at the moment they're not yet, you know, being hit with huge, great increases and pass that on to customers. But can you foresee, or is it already happening, a scenario where the data center is located and what access it has to, you know, what price of power will matter? And again, I know the financial markets, latency, etc., is perhaps the overriding. So if it costs a bit more, it still doesn't matter. But just more generally, can you foresee a time, I'd say, is it already happening, where data center power costs will start influencing, you know, where people maybe are looking to, you know, put their assets in a colo facility?
Yeah, I can answer some of this one as well. So just for example, the Aruba data center, one of the decisions, I mean, Mike mentioned obviously to sort of mitigate the post-Brexit regulatory uncertainties, but shifting to a green energy data center as well was one of the key decisions that was made by Euronext. You see other data centers in areas like in the Nordics, for example, where cooling and power is a lot cheaper, and also cloud. You know, the fact that you're not running a dedicated data center 24/7 just for yourself. You're using shared resources in the cloud. So that's another reason why firms are utilizing the cloud, because when you're not using those servers, you can spin down those resources over the weekend. You know, you don't need, there's no trading activity, so you don't necessarily have to be utilizing the power and all that energy. So cloud is almost an answer to that. But at the same time, people need that flexibility. So, you know, the likes of Equinix, for example, they already offer a network edge in some of their data centers. So there's also a chip shortage. There's a shortage of key components for trading infrastructure and hardware. So they already offer those as a service. So rather than having to procure your own hardware, you know, you can either use the data centers edge solutions, where they actually provide those physical hard metal solutions themselves, or you can utilize the cloud environment. So Mike, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I think just one more point really is that you're absolutely right. I think power and the cost of power is increasingly a factor. As you say, latency will always be the number one, but we can't ignore what's going on, you know, in terms of power prices. And I think this is where you know, a managed service provider like Colt can really help, because you know, we do have shared infrastructure. You know, a lot of our clients will share co-location site, you know, so we can, you know, what's the right word? Amalgamate the cost amongst lots of different entities. So that's one thing just to mention. And you know, that's probably the only other bit I'd like to add.
Yes, but we're not going to see. I mean, it seems to be logical. The more data centers are put in these better climatic places, makes sense. But the financial markets will always require. London Docklands isn't going to end up in Iceland. They'll always need data centers right next to the trading environment. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, London is clearly always going to be an important location. And one of the interesting things that we did see after Brexit was that a lot of the infrastructure has still stayed in, you know, in London. I think I touched on it at the start, despite the fact, you know, Euronext has made this big decision, and obviously they are, you know, the biggest European, one of the biggest European markets. So that was a big blow. But what we've seen with a lot of the other kind of exchanges and MTFs, they are still located in, the infrastructure is still located in London. SIBO, the biggest MTF, has their matching engines in LD4. And that's despite having to set up new entities on the continent in terms of regulatory and legal requirements for, you know, in post-Brexit, after Brexit. So to answer your question, yes, you know, the London has to come into the long-term strategy, and for that reason, places like the Docklands, places like LD4 are always going to be important, and the connectivity between those locations is always going to be important. And you know, it's almost like we've seen a little bit of a kind of globalization happen. Which, and what I mean by that is that this fragmentation has caused kind of hubs to appear, but within those hubs, we're seeing more and more connectivity requirements and more, you know, so it's like globalization hasn't stopped, but it's just fractured into kind of maybe one or two more locations, and more than ever, it's important that you have a connectivity partner that can provide solid and secure solutions between those different hubs.
Okay, well, it's been great to chat to you both, and thank you very much for sharing the insights. So, Terence and Michael, thank you very much indeed. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.